Bob Dylan shocked his fans in 1979. Between songs at a concert, he stopped playing and started preaching. Then he named names. He called out one band specifically. He said they sold their soul for entertainment. This wasn't just about music anymore. Dylan had become a born-again Christian, and he believed rock bands were dragging kids to hell. The man who rebelled against everything was now condemning rebellion itself. For someone who built his career on breaking rules, this attack revealed a side off the lane nobody expected. Bob Dylan was born Robert Allen Zimmerman on May 24, 1941, in a small hospital in Duluth, Minnesota. Weighing 7 pounds and 13 he came into the world with a name few would ever associate with fame. But before he became Bob Dylan, the legend, he was a quiet boy from a tight-knit Jewish family, trying to hold on to their roots in a land that never fully welcomed them. His Hebrew name was Shabtai Zissel ben Abraham. That means something. Shabbai for the Sabbath. Zissel meaning sweet. His father Abba came from a line of Jewish immigrants who had escaped the violence of Odessa, Russia. In Duluth they kept kosher, went to the synagogue, and sent young Robert to Hebrew school. He spent summers at Camp Herschel in Wisconsin, where he first played the harmonica and guitar with other Jewish kids. His bar mitzvah in 1954 wasn't just big, it was legendary. 400 guests showed up in tiny hip. Since the town didn't have a rabbi, they brought one in from Brooklyn. Dylan later said the rabbi seemed like a ghost. He came, did the job, and vanished. Then polio struck. In 1947, when Dylan was just 6, Abe Zimmerman's life changed forever. He'd been an athlete, a man who loved sports, but polio left him with a limp and he couldn't keep working for Standard Oil in Duluth. The family packed up and moved 86 miles northwest to Hipping, a mining town scarred by the open-pit iron mines that swallowed up the landscape. There, Abe and his brother spawned a furniture and appliance store. It was gritty, it was working gas, and it became Dylan's new world. Inside their home on 7th Avenue East, a blue stucco house with a red door, Dylan discovered radio. In the 1940s, there was no TV, just sound waves and static. That's when he heard Hank Williams, not just the hits, it was Williams's alter ego, Luke the Drifter, that hit Dylan hardest. Moral tales, spoken word, grit. He played that record over and over. It went through me like an electric rod, Hess did. Williams died in 1953. Dylan was 11, but that voice never left him. Hess said he could drift away for hours, convinced in the goodness of man. By high school, Dylan was already trying different skins. He joined garage bands and called himself Gun, sometimes with 2 N's, sometimes 3. He liked the sound of Robert Allen, but it felt too normal. After hearing jazz singer David Allen, he toyed with spelling his name Allen instead. Then he found Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet. That clicked. Robert Dylan, Bob Dylan. The name rolled off his tongue by instinct. He didn't plan it. Someone asked his name one night and it just came out. Bob Dylan. Later in 1962, he made it official. But, truth he told the world was often a lie. Dylan liked to say he was an orphan, that he had no ties, that he rode the rails and lived off scraps. But his family had money. Not extravagant wealth, but enough. The furniture store in Hibbing made them respected. His dad was president of the local B'nai B'rith. His mother led the local Hadassah. Their house was solid, their names known. This background didn't fit the image Dylan wanted, so he erased it. He needed to be a wanderer, a mystery. In 1960, he dropped out of the University of Minnesota after just 1 year. He didn't leave to chase fame. He left to find Aiding Man. Woody Guthrie, his hero, was wasting away from Huntington's disease, a New Jersey psychiatric hospital. Dylan made a pilgrimage. He visited Guthrie at Greystone Hospital, just it near him. He watched his idol tremble, struggling to speak. To Dylan, this was holy ground. He later wrote that Guthrie's songs held the infinite sweep of humanity. Guthrie didn't just write music, he carried America's soul. Dylan wanted to be that vessel. He landed in New York on January 24, 1961 with nothing but a guitar, a harmonica, and blind hope. That first night, he barged into Café Wa and asked to play. Snow still clung to his shoulders. He sang Guthrie songs to a near-empty room. He slept on couches. He was cold. He was broke. He sent letters back home, saying had nothing. But he kept playing. Putin Annie's basement coffee shops. He made the rounds in the village. His clothes were ragged, but people saw something raw and real. Then, on September 29, 1961, a review changed everything. Robert Shelton of the New York Times saw Dylan perform at Gertie's Folk City. Dylan was opening for a bluegrass band, the Greenbrier Boys. But Shelton's review wasn't just positive, it was glowing. He called Dylan one of the most distinctive stylists to hit Manhattan in months. That single review caught fire. Within days, John Hammond at Columbia Records signed him, but Notavarian at Columbia was convinced. When Hammond brought Dylan in on October 26, 1961, the label laughed. They called it Hammond's Folly. One executive even said Dylan's music was the worst thing he'd ever heard. Hammond defended him. He said Dylan wasn't polished, wasn't a good singer, or even a good guitarist, but he was different. Hammond believed Dylan could reach a lost generation. He just wanted the studio to capture who Dylan really was. The first album nearly proved everyone else right. Bob Dylan, his debut, came out on March 19, 1962. It flopped. Recorded in just 2 short sessions. It cost about $42 to make. Dylan only had 2 original songs on it. The rest were old folk and blues standards. He refused to do stick takes. He hissed into the mic, wandered off pitch, and popped every P. Hammond was frustrated. Dylan hated the final cut. It sold just 5,000 copies in the first year. Some say only 2,500. He was crushed. The label was humiliated. Dylan even considered quitting music. Bob Dylan wrote, "The times they are a-changing" in September 1963, meant for it to sound like a message from the people, even if it was carefully crafted. When his friend Tony Glover read the line, "Come, senators, congressmen, please heed the call," he asked Dylan, "What is this, man?" Dylan simply replied, "Well, you know, it seems to be what the people want to hear." The song used biblical language, borrowing from the Gospel of Mark, "They first will be last." It felt spiritual and political at the same time. Dylan performed the song 633 times between 1963 and 2009. That made it his 23rd most played song ever. It became an unofficial anthem during the Civil Rights Movement and the protests against the Vietnam War. Over time, the song's meaning shifted. Literary critic Christopher Ricks pointed out that in the 1960s, the message was aimed at uptight parents, whose kids were becoming hippies. By the early 2000s, it had flipped. Now it was about those same hippies, realizing their kids had become polished yuppies. But Dylan never wanted to be anyone's leader. People kept calling him a protest singer, and he started pushing back. In May 1963, CBS told him not to perform. Talking John Birch Paranoid Blues on The Ed Sullivan Show. Rather than censor himself, Dylan walked off. A few months later, in December 1963, he shocked the audience at a civil liberties dinner. Only 3 weeks after JFK's assassination, he gave a drunken, strange speech and said he saw something of himself in Lee Harvey. It did not go over well. When asked later about the free speech protests at Berkeley, he brushed them off and said, "I don't have to put up with any teachers. I don't have to take any tests." By 1965, when Sing Out magazine asked if he supported student protests or Black Power movements, he said, "No." Even Noam Chomsky noted that Dylan seemed like the perfect figure for a capitalist PR machine, not a rhetorical. Dylan himself admitted, "I just can't have people sit around and make rules for me. I don't want to write for people anymore." In public, Dylan looked like a folk purist, but behind the scenes, he was drawing from completely different wells. At Columbia Records, John Hammond gave him an old album of Robert Johnson's blues recordings. It changed everything. Dylan copied Johnson's style so closely that critics were stunned. His 1962 track, "Quit Your Low-Down Ways," sounded almost like a remix of Johnson's Terraplane Blues and Stones in My Passway. He also deeply admired Hank Williams, calling him the country Shakespeare. In liner notes for Joan Baez's record, Dylan even a tribute, "And my first idol was Hank Williams, for he sang about Thurl Road lines." These early influences didn't show up until years later when Dylan finally released Nashville, Skyline, the late 1960s. Critics admitted they had never heard anything like it, not even from other country artists. Then came the night that changed everything. July 25, 1965, Newport Folk Festival. Dylan stepped on stage with a Fender Stratocaster backed by the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. The crowd expected protest songs and acoustic guitars. What they got was raw electric noise. He opened with Maggie's Farm. The crowd booed. People screamed "traitor" and "sell out." According to legend, folk icon Pete Seeger was so furious he grabbed an axe and tried to cut the sound cables. Seeger later said he only hated the poor sound quality. But the damage was done. After just 3 songs, Dylan was forced off stage. He returned with an acousticutor and ended with, "It's all over now, baby blue." That song title felt like a message, not just to the audience, but to his former self. The night was later called the night that split the 60s. Ironically, just 5 days before that performance, Dylan had released Like a Rolling Stone. No one expected it to be a hit. It ran for over 6 minutes, doubled the standard radio length. Columbia Records almost canceled it, calling the sound too loud and chaotic. But one employee secretly took a demo to a club called Arthur in New York. The DJ there played it over and over until the record physically wore out. The next morning, radio stations were calling for copies. The song hit number 2 on the Billboard charts just behind the Beatles' Help. It wasn't just a hit, it was a warning shot. Bruce Springsteen said that hearing it felt like someone kicked open the door to your mind. Frank Zappa even joked it made him want to quit music altogether, because nothing more needed to be said. Years later, Rolling Stone magazine named it the greatest song of all time, and in 2014, Dylan's handwritten lyrics sold at auction for $2 million. Between March 1965 and May 1966, Dylan released 3 albums that completely reshaped popular music. First came Bringing It All Back Home, which had one side of electric tracks and one side of acoustic. It was a farewell to folk, half gentle, half explosive. Next came Highway 61, Revisited, named after the road that ran from Dylan's hometown in Minnesota to New Orleans. That album turned the folk rock experiment into something wild and new. Then came Blondie and Blonde in 1966, the final piece of the puzzle. Together, these 3 albums formed what fans called the Electric Trilogy. They blended rock, blues, and poetry. They didn't just influence other artists. They redefined what popular music could be. Dylan had moved from protest singer to prophet, from acoustic poet to electric preacher. Not everyone celebrated the change. Some people felt deeply betrayed. At concerts in 1965 and beyond, the booing never stopped. In Manchester, a fan famously yelled "Judacy" right at Dylan's face. Others burned his records in protest. Critics like Erwin Silber and Ewan McCall accused him of abandoning politics and jiving in to commercialism. They believed folk music was sacred, tied to real causes like civil rights and anti-war movements. Rock music to them was flashy and fake. Dylan didn't respond. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just kept playing louder. Some of his fans sent him threats, angry letters calling him a sellout, accusing him of turning his back on the people who had once raised him up. But Dylan had made up his mind. He wasn't going to carry anyone's flag anymore. On July 29, 1966, something happened that stopped the music world in its tracks. Bob Dylan crashed his Triumph Tiger 100 motorcycle near Woodstock, New York, he said. He broke several vertebrae in his neck, but there was no police report. His manager, Albert Geeman, was driving behind him and said Dylan didn't even look hurt. It was strange, almost too quiet for such a serious event. Years later, Dylan admitted the crash gave him the perfect excuse to escape the spotlight. He said, "Truth was that I wanted to get out off the wet race." Whether the injuries were real or not, the crash allowed him to disappear when fame had become memorable. For weeks afterward, Dylan wore a neck brace. It added to the story that something serious had happened. But instead of going to a hospital, he hid away in the home of Dr. Ed Thaler in Middletown, New York. He stayed there for up to 6 weeks. The doctor's widow later said Dylan showed up very upstand, insisted on recovering in their 3rd-floor bedroom. Then he vanished. He stopped performing live for nearly 8 years. Just after releasing Blonde on Blonde, when he was seen as the most important musician alive, he walked away from it all. Fans were stunned. Rumors spread that he had died. By the time he returned to the stage in 1974, even his biggest supporters weren't sure who he was anymore. But he hadn't stopped creating. During his quiet years, Dylan and the Hawks, who would become the band, set up in the basement of a pink house in West Societies. From June to October 1967, they recorded over 100 songs. These weren't polished studio tracks, they were raw, honest, recorded with just one mic and no pressure. At first, the songs were meant for other artists, but the music was too good to stay hidden. Copies leaked. Soon, Peter, Paul, and Mary released Too Much of Nothing, which reached number 35. Manfred Mann's The Mighty Quinn hit number 1 in the UK. Julie Driscoll's version of This Wheel's on Fire hit number 5. Dylan's Quiet Retreat had started something huge without even trying. Then came a bootleg that changed music history. In July 1969, exactly 3 years after the crash, fans in California discovered Great White Wonder, a double album with no label, no artist name, just a plain white cover. It included 7 songs from the Basement Sessions, some 1961 demos, and a track from the Johnny Cash Show. 5 radio stations on the West Coast played it, even though it was illegal. The bootleggers, only known as Ken and Dub, were shocked. One said, "All of a sudden, we just started having fistfuls of money." They didn't know it yet, but they had just created the modern bootleg industry. Dylan became the most bootlegged artist of all time. Fans were no longer waiting for official releases. They were finding ways to get the music any way they could. Behind the scenes, Dylan's personal life was also changing.